It's 1957. A woman named Linda McDonald lies strapped to a hospital bed inside the Allen Memorial Institute at McGill University in Montreal. She's not sick in the usual sense. She's not suffering from any injury. But she's become a subject in one of the most disturbing scientific experiments in modern history. Electrodes are attached to her temples. She's been injected with a massive dose of LSD. A tape recorder nearby plays her own voice on a loop, distorted and robotic, repeating the same chilling phrase, "I'm a good girl. I do what I'm told." Over and over, for days, then weeks. Electroshock sessions follow. Memory-erasing drugs. Silence. By the time she's released, Linda doesn't remember her husband. She doesn't recognize her children. She doesn't even know her own name. This isn't a dystopian novel or the script of a horror film. It was real. And it was funded by the CIA. You don't need ghosts or demons to be afraid. Sometimes, the real nightmare comes in the form of science with a government grant and a lab coat. Science is meant to help us understand the world, save lives, and push the boundaries of knowledge. But sometimes, in the name of progress, ethics are left behind. What follows are 10 real experiments that crossed lines most of us didn't even know existed. Let's start with the one you already met. 1. Project MKUltra. In the early years of the Cold War, the CIA launched a secret program called MKUltra. Its goal was simple but terrifying: develop methods of mind control before America's enemies did. What they actually did was far more disturbing. Using hospitals and universities across North America, they tested LSD, electroshock therapy, and sensory deprivation on hundreds of people, often without their consent. Some were prisoners, some were mental patients. Others were just unlucky enough to be in the wrong hospital at the wrong time. At McGill, psychiatrist Dr. Ewan Cameron believed he could de-pattern a brain, erase all memory, and rebuild it from scratch. His methods were brutal. Massive doses of drugs, long-term induced comas. Repetitive messages played for hours. The results were catastrophic. Patients lost the ability to read, speak, or even go to the bathroom unassisted. When the program was finally exposed in the 1970s, it caused a public outcry. But to this day, many of the documents were destroyed, and we still don't know the full extent of what happened. 2. The Monster Study. Torturing children with words. It sounds like the title of a horror movie, but the Monster Study was real, and it happened in Iowa. In 1939, a speech pathologist named Wendell Johnson wanted to understand how stuttering develops, so he designed an experiment using orphans as test subjects. Some children were praised for their speech, encouraged to speak freely. Others who spoke normally were belittled, criticized, and told they had a problem. They were made to feel ashamed of how they talked. The goal was to see if negative feedback could cause stuttering. Spoiler: it did. Children who had no speech issues before began to stammer, avoid speaking, and withdraw socially. The psychological trauma lasted for years. Johnson never published the study in his lifetime. He knew exactly what he'd done. 3. Unit 731, Japan's Secret House of Horrors. During World War II, Nazi Germany wasn't the only regime conducting horrific experiments. In Japanese-occupied China, Unit 731 was a secret biological and chemical warfare research unit run by the Imperial Army. Here, doctors performed vivisections, live dissections on prisoners, including children. They infected people with bubonic plague, cholera, and anthrax to test how the diseases progressed. Victims were frozen, starved, exposed to extreme heat, or subjected to high-pressure chambers until their bodies gave out. These weren't just war crimes. They were methodical, state-sponsored torture in the name of science. And the worst part? After the war, many of these scientists were never punished. In exchange for their data, the U.S. granted them immunity. 4. The Stanford Prison Experiment. In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo recruited 24 male college students to take part in a simulated prison experiment at Stanford University. Half were assigned as guards, the other half as prisoners. The goal was to observe how people behave in prison-like environments. What followed spiraled out of control fast. The guards, given authority, became abusive. The prisoners, stripped of identity and dignity, became passive or rebellious. The experiment, meant to last 2 weeks, was shut down after just 6 days. Zimbardo himself admitted he got too involved. He stopped being a researcher and started acting like a prison superintendent. This study is now textbook material for how ordinary people, given power and no accountability, can become monsters. Or, in the words of one participant, I began to actually feel like a prisoner and not just an experiment subject. Still think it's just about bad apples? 5. The Milgram Experiment. Imagine this. You're brought into a lab and told to deliver electric shocks to another person when they get answers wrong. The shocks increase in intensity, from mild to deadly. The person on the other side screams, begs. Eventually, they go silent. Would you keep going just because someone in a lab coat says, the experiment requires that you continue? Most people think they'd stop. But in the 1961 Milgram experiment, 65% of participants went all the way administering what they believed were fatal shocks. The person wasn't really being shocked, but the subjects didn't know that. The study revealed something haunting. Regular people, teachers, office workers, parents were willing to hurt others simply because they were told to. It wasn't about sadism. It was about obedience, and that's what made it so terrifying. 6. The Russian sleep experiment. Let's be honest. The viral story of the Russian sleep experiment is a creepypasta, not a historical fact. But it was inspired by real Soviet experiments on sleep deprivation. In the mid-20th century, both the Soviet Union and the US ran tests to see how long humans could go without sleep. The results were unnerving. In one Soviet study, test subjects were kept awake for over 10 days using stimulant gases and bright lights. Hallucinations set in by day 3. By day 5, paranoia and aggression. Beyond that, complete mental breakdown. Some attempted suicide. Others had to be restrained. Sleep, it turns out, isn't just rest, it's survival. 7. The Aversion Project. Cruelty in the Name of Cure. During apartheid-era South Africa, the military initiated a horrifying campaign against its own soldiers. If a soldier was suspected of being gay, he could be referred to Dr. Aubrey Levin, a man obsessed with correcting homosexuality. His methods included chemical castration, electroshock therapy, and forced sex reassignment surgeries. Between 1971 and 1989, it's estimated that up to 900 soldiers were subjected to these procedures without consent. Dr. Levin later moved to Canada, where he was eventually arrested for unrelated abuses. But many of his victims were never acknowledged, let alone compensated. Imagine your government destroying your identity and body in the name of morality. 8. Tuskegee syphilis. Study lies in the name of science. From 1932 to 1972, the U.S. Public Health Service ran a study on black men in Tuskegee, Alabama. The goal was to observe the progression of untreated syphilis. Here's the catch. The men weren't told they had syphilis. They were told they had bad blood. Even after penicillin became the standard cure in the 1940s, doctors withheld treatment just to see what would happen. Over 100 men died. Dozens of wives were infected. Children were born with congenital syphilis. The study finally ended after a whistleblower leaked the story to the press. But the damage was done not just to the victims, but to trust in the medical system that still hasn't fully recovered. 9. Operation Sea Spray. In 1950, the U.S. Navy released large quantities of Sriracha marcescens, a potentially harmful bacteria, into the air over San Francisco. The goal? To test how vulnerable the city might be to a biological attack. What happened? Within days, residents began showing up at hospitals with rare infections. One man died. The military denied responsibility for decades. This wasn't an isolated case. Similar tests were conducted in New York, St. Louis, and other cities. It begs the question, how many harmless tests are we never told about? 10. The Human Radiation Experiments. During the Cold War, the U.S. government funded secret studies on the effects of radiation on the human body. This included injecting hospital patients with plutonium without their knowledge, feeding radioactive oatmeal to children in orphanages, and exposing soldiers to nuclear blasts to study the impact. These weren't isolated incidents. They were coordinated, taxpayer-funded programs. Many participants didn't even know they were part of a study until years later. When the truth finally emerged in the 1990s, President Clinton issued a formal apology. But apologies don't undo decades of deceit. Science is one of the most powerful tools we have, but it's only as ethical as the people using it. These 10 experiments remind us that progress, when unchecked by morality, can lead us into some very dark places. We like to believe we've learned from the past, that we'd never allow something like this to happen again. But history suggests otherwise, so the next time you hear someone say, "It's for science," maybe ask one more question. If you found this video thought-provoking, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching, and see you on the next one.